Welcome, traveler, to another night of timeless tales. You've just arrived at Sleeping Legends, where stories from the shadows of history come to life beneath the stars. But before we begin, tell us, where are you watching from? What country do you call home? And what time is it right now in your corner of the world? Drop it in the comments. We love seeing how far our legends travel. Fire. Tonight, we journey back to a time of long winters and dim candlelight. A time when survival wasn't guaranteed, and every ember mattered. How did medieval peasants, without central heating or modern comforts, brave the coldest, most unforgiving nights? Ear of rice. Was it just wool and firewood, or was there more to their quiet strength? Get cozy, wrap yourself in a blanket, and let's uncover the clever, sometimes surprising ways they endured those frost-bitten hours. Red Heart Hash. If you enjoy stories like this, ancient, strange, and soothing, don't forget to give this video a like, subscribe to Sleeping Legends, and tap the bell so you never miss a midnight tale. Books. Be sure to check out our other stories waiting just for you. Tales of forgotten kings, haunted castles, and myths whispered through time. Crescent Moon. Now, close your eyes if you dare, and drift into a world where firelight danced on stone walls, and survival was an art passed down through generations. Candle Hash. This is how medieval peasants survived the coldest nights. Tonight, we're diving into something cold. No, not your ex's texts. We're talking about the kind of cold that seeps through your bones, your soul, and your single pair of flea-infested wool socks. Forget what movies told you. Medieval peasants weren't skipping through snow singing songs about feasting and fair maidens. Nah. Most nights, they were just trying not to freeze to death in a mud hut the size of your bathroom. Before we get too comfy, smash that like button if you enjoy this kind of slightly sad, slightly fascinating historical deep dive. Drop a comment below and tell me where you're watching from, preferably somewhere with central heating. Now, dim the lights, get a blanket or two, maybe grab a snack, and get ready. You're about to wake up in the winter of 1323. As a peasant. In England. And baby, it's cold outside. You wake up. Except, you didn't really sleep. Not well. Not with 6 other family members and a goat crammed into the same room. Your bed. A rough sack stuffed with straw, probably damp. You share it with your siblings and the lingering scent of whatever died under the floorboards last spring. You pull your cloak tighter, not because it's cozy, but because it's literally all you have. A single layer of rough-spun wool, scratchy enough to exfoliate your entire body. And let's be honest, you're not changing clothes today. Or tomorrow. Or this month. You wear what you sleep in. You sleep in what you wear. It's a vicious, itchy, freezing circle. But how do you actually survive the coldest nights? Great question. Let's get medieval with it. Fire 1. Live like a human burrito. Peasants weren't dumb. When it got cold, they bundled up. Blankets were rare luxuries, but cloaks, rags, and whatever could be stitched together. Gold. Families would huddle together for warmth, a medieval cuddle pile. No privacy, no personal space, just raw, functional survival snuggles. You, your siblings, your parents, your livestock. Yes, livestock. Pig 2. Bring in the pigs. Heating? Forget it. You were the insulation. But pigs? They radiated heat like little bacon space heaters. Many peasants brought animals inside the house at night, not out of love, but out of need. So congrats, you now share your bedroom with a sweating pig named Muckfoot. He smells like wet hay and destiny. Symbol 3. The smoke blanket method. Ever slept in a smoky house? You will now. Many medieval huts had no chimneys. Just a hole in the roof and a fire in the middle of the room. At night, that fire gets stoked not just for warmth, but because the smoke lingers, creating a kind of thermal blanket under the roof. Yes, it's toxic. Yes, it burns your eyes. But hey, you're warm, and you'll probably only shave 5 years off your life. 4. Bathroom? Forget it. You're not going outside to pee at 2 a.m. Not in the snow. Not when wolves exist. There's a bucket in the corner. Use it wisely. Pray no one knocks it over. Now that you've survived the night, you have to go outside. It's morning. You step out of your hut. Your boots are just wooden clogs with a bit of straw jammed in. Your fingers? Already numb. And here's the best part. You still have to work. Cold or not, the Lord's land doesn't plough itself. So you trudge through half-frozen mud to tend to fields, fix fences, maybe chop firewood, all on a diet of bread, onions, and whatever root vegetables haven't rotted yet. No coffee. No fleece-lined anything. Just raw determination and a faint hope that spring doesn't forget about you this year. Now, let's say you did have a good harvest. Maybe you have some fat to burn, literally. Some homes used tallow candles, made from animal fat, for light and a bit of heat. If you're fancy, you might have a small hearth and actual firewood. But most likely, you're burning whatever you can find: sticks, peat, dried dung. Yep. You're heating your home with poop. Hey, don't look so shocked, it's renewable. But here's the real thing that helped peasants survive: each other. These were tight-knit communities. People shared what they could. Watched each other's kids. Helped that one guy fix his leaky roof for the 5th time. In a world without insurance, thermostats, or antibiotics, community was everything. Also, you had no choice. If someone had firewood and you had food, you traded, you shared, or you froze. So yeah, medieval winters were brutal. And yet, people survived. With smoke in their lungs, pigs in their beds, and frostbite flirting with their toes, they made it through. Next time your Wi-Fi goes out or your heat dips below 70 degrees Fahrenheit, think about this. At least you didn't have to snuggle your pig for warmth. Unless you're into that. No judgment. Bullseye question for the comments. If you were dropped into the 1300s during a cold snap, what modern item are you smuggling in? Let me know down below. And if you enjoyed freezing your hypothetical butt off with me today, hit that like button, subscribe for more cozy misery, and don't forget to ring the bell so you never miss another adventure into the weird, wild, and weirdly warm parts of history. You made it through the night. Congrats. You're still cold, still itchy, and your bedhead could scare a Viking. Now it's time for breakfast. Which is more of a concept than a meal. You wander to the hearth. If you're lucky, there's still a crust of yesterday's bread. It's stale, rock hard, and probably home to a few weevils. You eat it anyway. Because food isn't for pleasure, it's for not dying. Want butter? Get a cow. Want salt? Trade for it. Want eggs? Better hope the hens didn't freeze their little chicken butts off last night. And don't ask about coffee. If you want something warm to drink, you might boil some water with herbs. Medieval peasant tea. No matcha. No oat milk. You sip, grimace, and move on. Now that you're somewhat fueled, it's time for interaction. You pass neighbors in the field. You nod. You grunt. And yes, you gossip. Because guess what? Medieval villages were the original group chats. And if Marjorie from 2 huts over gets a mysterious fever after hanging out behind the haystacks with John the blacksmith? Oh, everyone knows. The community is small. Tight. Everyone's business is everyone's business. No privacy, no secrets. If your goat farts weird, your neighbor's talking about it before noon. And yet, this messy, nosy village? It's your lifeline. Someone's thatching your roof next week. You'll help them with their potato pit next month. You need each other, not just emotionally, but functionally. But wait, what about romance? Let's say you catch the eye of someone while gathering wood. Sparks fly, not literally, you're out of firewood. You exchange a nod, maybe a mumble. It's getting serious. There's no Tinder, no love letters, no awkward DMs, just a series of practical glances and shared chores. And then one day, boom, you're married. Or, at least, you're life bonded because your parents arranged it and now there are 3 cows involved. Same vibe. In many villages, love was nice, but survival came first. Marriages were more economic alliances than fairy tales. But people still loved, still laughed, still found ways to flirt. Even if it was mostly, "Hey, I saved you a turnip." Romantic, right? But now let's say you get sick. Uh-oh. Sore throat? Could be a cold. Could be the plague. Spin the wheel. Medieval peasants didn't have hospitals. They had herbs, prayers, and local wise women who were either healers or accused witches. Often both. You lie in bed, sweating. Your mother-in-law waves a sprig of dried nettle under your nose while chanting something about fox spirits. It might help. Or she might just be cursing your lungs. Unclear. Fun fact, fevers were often treated by wrapping you in a blanket soaked in ale and sweating it out by the fire. Not FDA approved. Toothache? Time to yank it. With pliers. No numbing. Wart on your foot? Try rubbing it with a dead mole and whispering to the moon. Yes, that was a real method. It's mushy, but warm. You sit with your family around the hearth. Someone tells a story. Maybe it's about a night. Maybe it's about the time old Roger fell in the bog and didn't come out until Christmas. Everyone laughs. You feel okay. Then you go to bed, fully clothed, tightly packed, under a damp wool blanket with 3 other humans and a chicken. The chicken is the warmest part. But here's a twist. Not everything was grim. Winter meant hardship, yes, but also gatherings, games, songs, and stories. Feast days broke the monotony. People looked forward to Christmas, Candlemas, and other feasts. Not because of gifts, but because it meant food. Laughter. Maybe some dancing. There'd be cider. Firelight. Terrible singing. You'd forget the cold for a few hours, wrapped in community, noise, and warmth, the human kind. And for a moment, it didn't matter that your boots were made of bark or that your house was 30% smoke. For a moment, you were alive. And that was enough. So here we are. You, medieval peasant extraordinaire, survived another cold night. Another cold day. You scratched out comfort from discomfort. You laughed despite the ache. You found joy in scraps. Would it be easy for a modern person to live that way? Let's be honest, most of us would tap out by day 3, sobbing into our goose-down pillows, crying for Wi-Fi and pizza. But these people, your ancestors, maybe, they didn't have a choice. And still, they made it. Not with tech. Not with luxury. But with community. Resilience. And an absolutely unreasonable tolerance for goat stink. If you enjoyed stepping back into this muddy, smoky, freezing but strangely beautiful slice of history, smash that like button. It keeps the fires lit around here. Here's a fun little nightmare fuel for you. What if winter didn't stop? I mean, you think it's spring. The birds lie. The sun teases. You put away your emergency rat stew recipe, and then bam, another freeze. In the Little Ice Age, roughly the 14th to 19th century, Europe got hit with repeated harsh winters, failed harvests, and what modern meteorologists call a very bad time. If your crops failed, you starved, or begged, or walked days to find work, if you had shoes. Some didn't. You're living day to day on moldy grain and the hope that your neighbors are still friendly. Or at least don't own swords. So yeah, when Game of Thrones says, winter is coming, medieval peasants were like, buddy, winter never left. Let's talk gender. Because surviving winter wasn't just a unified group effort, there were clear expectations based on who you were. Men. You're outside. Chopping wood. Digging trenches. Fixing that fence with your bare, frost-bitten hands because nails are rare and expensive. Also, you might be summoned to help your lord with some skirmish involving sheep stealing or land disputes. Women. You're the CEO of the household. Keeping the fire going. Spinning wool. Brewing ale. Cooking. Managing kids. Nursing livestock and sick relatives. Basically, running an unpaid medieval startup where the product is survival. Did roles overlap? Of course. In a crisis, everyone did everything. But women carried a massive part of winter survival, especially inside the house. That fire didn't stoke itself. Those root vegetables didn't dry themselves. That child covered in ash and beetroot definitely didn't bathe himself. And what about children? No iPads. No school snow days. You're 8 years old and already working. You feed chickens, fetch water, gather kindling, and get yelled at a lot. If you survive childhood, and that's a big if, you're considered lucky. The cold? It hits kids hard. If you're the baby, you get wrapped in furs, if available, and stuffed into the warmest part of the house, possibly next to a fire, possibly next to a pig. If you're old enough to walk, you're old enough to freeze your fingers off carrying slop buckets. No one's handing out mittens here. Now let's talk weather, because the cold wasn't always picturesque snowfall. A lot of it was wet. Mud. Rain. Sludge. That damp, soul-sapping cold that seeps through every layer, including your will to live. Your roof leaks. Your feet are wet constantly. You haven't had dry socks since early October, and you're starting to wonder if toes are optional. Imagine being cold and soaked, and trying to start a fire with twigs that might as well be noodles. Your best hope? That tomorrow's less terrible. And sometimes, it was. Sometimes the frost melted, and the world glittered in ice and silence. Sometimes the fog lifted, and you could see the forest again. Sometimes, it was just beautiful. In all this, faith mattered, deeply. Not because everyone was super devout, but because you needed something to believe in. The church was the one warm building in town, for starters. Stone walls, candles, community gatherings, and maybe a break from your daily shovel life. But faith also gave meaning to the suffering. If your child got sick, you prayed. If the crop failed, you prayed harder. If your fingers went numb and the wind whispered weird things at night, probably the devil. Pray immediately. Saints were real to you. Miracles? Possible. And if they didn't come? Well, maybe next winter. So how did people cope? Beyond huddling and hope, they told stories. Around fires, in dark taverns, while stirring cauldrons. Tales of fey folk, of haunted woods, of wandering nights and beasts that freeze the souls of sinners. They sang. Badly, but loudly. Winter songs, drinking songs, lullabies. They drank. A lot. Ale wasn't just for fun, it was safer than water, and it helped warm the body, and blur the edges of a cold life. A good laugh, a good mug, a good tale, these were the real heating systems of the medieval village. And weirdly, that's kind of timeless, isn't it? Alright, it's time to step back into the modern world. You've survived a full medieval winter. Your toes are, mostly, intact. Your soup was 70% turnip. You've avoided dying of smoke inhalation, goat trampling, and accidental plague exposure. But now look around. A heater hums. Your socks are dry. You can drink water without fear of dysentery. You probably haven't hugged a pig in weeks. And yet, don't you kind of admire those peasants? They didn't have much. But they had grit. They endured. They made jokes. They raised children, loved fiercely, and kept the fire alive, even if it meant burning cow dung and clinging to stories. So next time your heat's on the fritz, your soup's too cold, or your Wi-Fi glitches during a Netflix binge, just remember, it could be worse. You could be barefoot in a smoky hut, holding a root vegetable, trying to trade it for salt while a chicken pecks your last blanket. Okay, let's lighten it up a bit. Winter didn't just mean survival. It also meant boredom. And boredom, even in the Middle Ages, was the mother of weird little hobbies. You know how today we spiral into YouTube rabbit holes or build IKEA furniture just to feel something? Back then, you might pass the long dark evenings by whittling a spoon, because spoons are currency. Telling ghost stories so scary they made adults cry. Playing dice made from sheep knuckles, called knucklebones, medieval party essential. Entertainment wasn't just luxury, it was therapy. It was how you kept the darkness outside and inside from swallowing you whole. And no, you didn't have board games. But you had imagination, some carved wood, and a deep well of creative spite. Honestly, that's all you need. And let's not forget, winter was haunted. You know that eerie silence after snowfall? That dead stillness? In medieval villages, that silence whispered with superstition. You believed, or at least feared, in forest spirits that could curse your home, witches who stole warmth from your hearth, animals that talked on Christmas Eve and judged you, and the wild hunt, a ghostly procession of hunters and hounds galloping through the sky on stormy nights. You didn't just survive the cold, you respected it, feared it, believed it might actually be alive. You hung charms. You said blessings before sleep. You didn't whistle after sundown. And if something howled in the woods, you did not go investigate. Because this was not a Netflix horror movie. This was your life. And the wind had teeth. Oxen pulled your plough. Chickens gave you eggs, and weird companionship. Cats were half witch, half mouse trap. Dogs guarded your meager food and sometimes your children. And in winter, when the days got bleak and your neighbors were losing it a little, your animals stayed. Silent. Warm. Steady. They didn't ask questions. They didn't judge your 8th bowl of cabbage soup. They were just there. Of course, when times got really rough. Yeah. They became dinner. And that was heartbreaking. Not just because of the calories lost, but because you knew them. You named them. They were part of the family. Survival wasn't clean. It wasn't easy. It was choosing between starving with your goat or crying over your stew. Let's talk about something nobody wants to talk about in history documentaries. What did it feel like to be a peasant in winter, emotionally? Short answer. Probably not great. Seasonal depression? Check. Crushing stress? Check. No therapists, journals, or treat yourself days. Double check. If you felt overwhelmed, hopeless, or broken, your options were limited. Pray. Drink. Work harder. Or tell a weird riddle to distract yourself from reality. And yet, somehow, people endured. They built emotional resilience the hard way, through community, story, repetition, and just surviving one more day. There was no time to spiral. You had pigs to feed and fire to tend. Still, the weight lingered. Quiet. Heavy. Like snow. Some of the most skilled work happened in winter, when the fields froze and the hands were free. This was when craftspeople thrived. You might become a cobbler, fixing shoes from literal scraps. A blacksmith, shaping tools by the forged warmth. A weaver, spinning wool into coarse, wearable blankets. A cooper, making barrels that held food, ale, dreams. Winter was cold, but it was also creative. If you had the tools and talent, you could trade goods, maybe even save enough to avoid total poverty come spring. Craft wasn't just expression. It was currency. And for some, it was the one thing that brought light into the darkness. Then, finally, a shift. The air changes. Not much, but enough. The snow melts just a little sooner in the day. The mud returns. You curse it, but also smile. You hear birds again. Real ones. Not in your dreams. The sun lingers. The days stretch their legs. A bit of green pokes out of the frozen earth like a dare. You survived. Spring doesn't arrive in a blaze of glory. It creeps. One soft footstep at a time. But when it finally comes, it feels like the greatest gift ever given. You can breathe again. You can plant. You can dream. Let's zoom out. We live in a world where winter is often an inconvenience, not a threat. We whine about snow on our windshield, grumble when the Wi-Fi lags. And hey, valid complaints. But just maybe, there's something powerful in remembering those who came before us. They didn't just survive. They adapted. They created. They huddled close and made the dark a little less terrifying. Together. So the next time you're wrapped in a blanket, sipping hot chocolate, and your toes are toasty, spare a thought for the peasant version of you, sleeping with goats, chewing turnips, and whispering prayers to the frost not to take your roof. So, what happens if someone steals your firewood? Let's talk medieval justice. And yeah, it's about as warm and fuzzy as a snowball to the face. Stealing in winter wasn't just frowned upon, it was deadly serious. If someone swiped your salted meat or firewood pile, that wasn't just theft. That was a possible death sentence for your whole family. You didn't have the luxury of pressing charges. You had manorial courts, run by local lords. Public shaming, hello, stocks in the snow. Fines you couldn't afford. In extreme cases, execution or exile. Imagine being banished from your already miserable village in the dead of winter. With no coat, no food, just a vague sense of regret and frozen eyebrows. Moral of the story? Don't mess with the root cellar. And maybe keep an extra turnip on hand to bribe your neighbor into silence. Now let's say you don't freeze. You don't starve. You don't break medieval law. You still have to deal with everything else trying to kill you. Wild animals? Still a thing. Wolves roamed parts of medieval Europe, especially in winter, when food was scarce. A small child wandering off could disappear. A weak goat? Gone. Bandits? Also still a thing. Roads were empty, unlit, and dangerous. If you had to travel between villages, especially to trade during winter famine, you were a walking target, carrying grain, cloth, salt, or soap. Your best defense. Travel in groups. Carry a staff. Hope the bandits are cold and lazy that day. You were vulnerable. Always. Not just to nature, but to people. And that changes you. Makes you cautious. Tough. Paranoid. And yet, you keep going. Because you have to. Let's shine a light on the people we don't usually talk about. The elders. The widows. The useless old men with stories and the bent-backed women who somehow kept everything running. They weren't flashy. They didn't always contribute firewood or food. But they were the memory keepers. When something broke, they knew how to fix it. When you were too tired to keep going, they told you how they survived the winter of '87. Not 1987. The other one. The one with wolves. And the widows? Absolute badasses. Running households solo. Protecting kids. Bartering like beasts. Holding villages together when the menfolk died of, I don't know, falling off ladders or choking on a boiled onion. They were steel. Wrapped in shawls. With hands like bark and hearts like fire. Now, let's peek into the medieval pantry, aka the difference between survival and, well, not. Peasants didn't eat fresh much during winter. They relied on what they'd stored during the fall. Root vegetables buried in pits. Salted meats, if you were lucky. Dried peas, beans, and grain. Fermented cabbage, high, medieval sauerkraut. Hard cheese aged until it could double as a weapon. You'd ration it all with religious precision. No waste. No impulse snacking. That last onion? You might stretch it across 5 meals. And the cellar. It wasn't just storage. It was sacred. Your family's lifeline. You guarded it. You prayed over it. You maybe cried in it once or twice. You understood the value of every single calorie. The medieval peasant wasn't just fighting poverty or politics, they were fighting the weather like it was a villain. Snow wasn't pretty. It was a death announcement. Rain could rot your roof. Fog could steal your way home. Hail could destroy what little crop you had left. Every storm was personal. Every dry day was a blessing. You tracked the sky like it owed you money. The weather wasn't small talk, it was strategy. Because out here, the climate didn't care if you were good or hardworking or tired. It just was. But here's the thing they don't teach you in school. In the heart of the cold, peasants still found joy. Tiny, stubborn joy. A warm cup of ale. Magic. A child's laughter during snow play. Medicine. A roof that doesn't leak this year. Victory. You see, you learned to love little things. Because they were all you had. You learned to love. The first green shoot after thaw. The soft crackle of fire after a hard day. A smile from someone who also didn't sleep well. Bread that wasn't rock hard. Surviving winter wasn't glamorous. But it was human. Messy. Painful. Beautiful. And deeply, deeply real. So, here's the question. Would you have made it? Would you have hacked frozen wood with frozen fingers? Would you have eaten the same soup every day for 3 months? Would you have snuggled livestock to stay alive? Would you have carried water, hauled ash, mended holes, and kept smiling when your roof caved in? Let's be honest, most of us would have been the guy in the back, holding a turnip like, is this dinner? Or a weapon? So let's give them a little respect, the grandmas, the goat huggers, the soot-faced kids, and the snow-beaten mothers singing lullabies in smoke-filled huts. If you made it this far, seriously, you deserve a wool cloak and a warm potato. You might think medieval peasants just endured. But no, they had rituals. Not just religious ones, though yes, church bells and saints' feast days ruled the calendar. We're talking daily, earthy, lived-in rituals that stitched meaning into every dark hour. Lighting the hearth every morning wasn't just a chore, it was an act of rebirth. Fire dies. You bring it back. That's power. You, a peasant, literally bring light into darkness. Washing your hands in cold water before meals wasn't just hygiene. It was a transition. A reminder that you were about to consume life. And maybe the only hot thing you'd touch all day was a bowl of barley stew. These repeated acts, small, deliberate, sacred in their own way, gave structure to the endless grey. You needed them. You clung to them. Because otherwise, every day would blur into wet wood, frozen fingers, and the smell of turnips. You know what's louder than modern city life? Silence in winter. Like, real silence. The kind that makes your ears ring. That makes you hear your own heartbeat, and not in a cute yoga way. So peasants filled the void with noise. Songs, chants, prayers, even just loud storytelling or banging pots. Anything to remind themselves. We're here. We exist. We haven't been swallowed by the cold. Religious hymns were common. Not because everyone was devout, but because singing together did something to your soul. It fought the stillness. The rhythm of psalms, of Ave Marias, became survival music. Children made up silly rhymes. Elders repeated old tales, again and again, half for comfort, half to keep memory alive. And when someone brought out a fiddle, that was a full-on rager. Let's talk about your medieval pharmacy. You don't have Tylenol. You don't have Vicks. You've got plants. And faith. And a very sketchy homemade balm that smells like fermented garlic and horse pee. Got a cold? Drink nettle tea. Inhale steam from boiling mint leaves. Sleep with a clove of garlic under your tongue, yes, really. Sprain something? Rub crushed comfrey leaves on it. Fever? Wrap yourself in fox fur and recite a charm in Latin you barely understand. But here's the thing, some of it worked. Not always. But enough to get by. Peasants didn't separate nature from medicine. They lived inside the cure. The forest wasn't just scary, it was your apothecary. If you respected it. If you didn't, it could kill you. Now let's talk about something you probably relate to more than you'd like. Seasonal depression. They didn't have a name for it. But they felt it. That creeping sense of ooh. That emotional weight. The moments where you stare into the fire too long and wonder if it's staring back. Peasants called it the midwinter mood. Some believed evil spirits walked more freely during long nights. Others said it was just the tiredness. They coped the best they could. More rituals. More songs. More prayers. More company. You didn't isolate, not if you could help it. Because everyone knew, a lonely person in the dark? That's when the whispers start. You kept busy. You leaned into rhythm. You moved, even if your heart felt frozen. And spring eventually came. Want to know the secret to medieval survival? It wasn't brute strength. It wasn't holy miracles. It was adaptation on a micro scale. Every year, every village, every family had its own strategy. One family dug their root cellar deeper. Another lined their walls with sheep wool. One guy figured out that sleeping under the oven bench was warmer than sharing a bed. A woman discovered dried moss worked better than cloth for wounds. This was trial and error evolution, happening quietly in every frozen hut. And nobody called it innovation. It was just staying alive. One idea, one bitter night, one cracked wooden spoon at a time. So what does all of this actually teach us? That survival isn't always glorious. That human beings, especially the poorest, coldest, hungriest among us, are remarkably good at finding ways to endure. And not just endure. To joke. To sing. To teach their kids how to play in the snow, even when their boots are falling apart. We've built our modern world to avoid discomfort. But in the past, discomfort was life. And still, people lived. Fully. They fell in love. They carved art. They made up recipes. They whispered secrets in the dark. They mattered. And so do you. All right. You've now spent the better part of 20 minutes living inside a smoke-filled, frost-covered, pig-adjacent peasant hut. You survived medieval depression, frostbite, bandits, wolves, and someone named Marjorie stealing your last onion. So here's the final question, and I want your honest take in the comments. White right pointing backhand index, would you thrive in a medieval village? Or would you be the first one begging the blacksmith to invent central heating? Tell me below. And if this deep freeze into history lit a little fire in your mind, give it a like, hit subscribe, and ring the bell so you don't miss the next strange trip through time. Alright, so you're surviving the cold, barely. But now, you need something you can't grow, dry, trap, or pray for. Maybe it's extra salt. Maybe it's a scrap of iron for a broken hinge. Maybe it's a candle, or something a little less legal. Welcome to the medieval black market, or, more accurately, the mud-brown barter circle. You don't have money. You don't have credit. You have a chicken. And some questionable cabbage. In winter, when the official supply chains froze up like your toes, peasants made their own network. Electric light bulb need a rabbit? Trade your wife's woven socks. Electric light bulb need some ale? Slip the brewer's son half a wheel of moldy cheese and promise not to tell the reeve. It wasn't exactly Ocean's 11, more like Giles and Marjorie quietly swap wool under a wagon while pretending to talk about the weather. Everyone pretended it didn't exist. But everyone used it. Because when the roads iced over and the lords weren't looking, you had to take survival into your own sooty hands. Yes, life was bleak. But medieval peasants knew how to party. Not just let's eat until the salted pork's gone. I'm talking full-blown ritualistic, community-wide, barn-burning joy bombs in the middle of winter. The most famous? Midwinter feasts. Yule. Christmas. Epiphany. Even local saints' days. They were more than holy days. They were emotional pressure valves. Party popper bonfires. Party popper carols with dark lyrics. Party popper meat from the pig they'd been fattening since spring. Party popper mead flowing until you forgot your toes were frostbitten. These festivals were strategically timed. Just as you were this close to snapping, your community dropped a celebration like a psychological life raft. And here's the kicker, most people didn't party because they were happy. They partied because they were desperate not to despair. Can't afford a feast? Your neighbors pitched in. Can't sing? Doesn't matter, you're still chanting in Latin with your mouth full of stew. It was rough joy. Feral joy. The kind that says, we're still here. And tonight, we dance. When you live in darkness, with no heating, no science textbooks, and a constant background hum of livestock noises, you get a little superstitious. Scratch that, you get very superstitious. Snowflake, is your child sick? Must be an elf bite. Snowflake, did the fire die twice in one night? Someone probably cursed your hearth. Snowflake, bread won't rise? Clearly, the local well spirit is mad at you again. Superstition was part survival mechanism, part primitive science, and part communal theater. Villagers hung rowan branches over doors. They'd whisper blessings into steaming pots. It sounds silly now, but when the wind screamed louder than your dog, and the moon disappeared for weeks at a time, magic didn't seem like fiction. It seemed like your best bet. You didn't believe because you were dumb. You believed because you were human, and humans tell stories to survive the night. Here's a truth we don't talk about enough. Cold messes with your brain. After days of shivering, your memory slips. You make bad decisions. Your mood collapses. Suddenly you're snapping at your cousin for breathing too loud, or staring into the hearth like it's plotting against you. Peasants learned to manage their minds without even realizing it. Daily rhythm equals stability. Singing equals mood regulation. Prayer equals coping mechanism. Community gossip. Emotional processing with bonus comedy. You didn't have a therapist, but you had the baker's wife who'd been through 5 winters and didn't care who heard her burp. And that kind of worked. Plus, there's something about suffering together that bonds people. It turns misery into comedy. Like medieval trauma bonding, but with soup. Winter wasn't just about surviving, it was also when you taught. Because there wasn't much else to do when it was dark 18 hours a day and your ox refused to leave the barn. Children learned everything from storytelling to wool spinning to how to gut a fish by candlelight. The elderly became the Netflix of the village. Need entertainment? Ask Grandpa about the wolf that ate half the 1342 oat harvest. Again. And the skills? Oh, the skills. You didn't write them down. You watched. You tried. You got yelled at, and then you tried again. Winter was the medieval classroom/apprenticeship/therapy hut. And if you were lucky, by the time spring came, you had a new skill, a thicker skin, and a deeper bond with the person who taught you how to mend a shoe using nothing but twine and spit. You're not in a medieval peasant hut right now. Unless you are? In which case, are you okay? But here's the thing. We still face winters. They just look different now. Maybe your winter is mental health, or loneliness, or financial cold spells. The medieval peasant didn't survive because they were stronger. They survived because they knew how to lean on each other. Because they found rhythm in routine, meaning in misery, and joy in absurdity. You can do that too. So if you're in your own kind of long night right now, just remember. Fire light the fire. Wrap tight. #Ear of rice sing something dumb with someone you trust. Open book tell a story that keeps the dark at bay. Because that's what we've always done. Hey, if this gave you a spark of warmth, or historical goosebumps, hit that like button like it owes you a wool cloak. White down pointing backhand index in the comments. What's your personal winter survival trick? Medieval or modern? Tell me everything. And don't forget to subscribe for more immersive history, where the truth is colder, weirder, and way more human than you ever imagined. Until next time, stay weird, stay warm, and remember, the fire doesn't light itself. So let's say you were doing okay. Your hut's mostly dry. Your fire's steady. You haven't hallucinated any saints this week. And then, boom, a blizzard. Or the roof caves in. Or wolves break into the pigpen. Or your only cow drops dead mid-chew. Because nature doesn't care about your plans. When disasters hit in winter, medieval peasants didn't panic. Okay, they did panic. But then they did what humans do best. They adapted together. The whole village got involved. Neighbors didn't ask, "Do you need help?" They just showed up. They lent you firewood. Brought hot broth. Abandoned house moved your family into their already crowded hut because sleeping on a dirt floor without a roof isn't great for morale or survival. And the roles shifted fast. The old lady who seemed useless? She knows how to patch that roof blindfolded. The shy teen? Suddenly she's calming the children and handing out turnips like a battlefield medic. Leadership wasn't always about hierarchy. It was about usefulness under pressure. You didn't survive by being independent. You survived by being interdependent. Let's talk about something rarely discussed in history books. Romance in the cold. You think it's hard to flirt in a bar? Try wooing someone when your teeth are chattering, your feet are wrapped in hay, and the only privacy you get is behind a cow. But love found a way. Because humans, even covered in soot and frostbite, are still humans. Winks across the fire. A stolen moment by the water trough. Holding hands under 6 layers of wool during evening prayers. And yes, intimacy happened. Beds were shared, bodies were pressed together for warmth and comfort. Sometimes it was tender. Sometimes awkward. Sometimes purely survival instinct with a dash of hormones. Marriage proposals might happen mid-snowstorm, carrying a bundle of firewood, with the elegant line, "Well, I suppose we might as well freeze together." And honestly, that's kind of beautiful. Now for the dark part, because not everyone made it. Winter claimed lives. Quietly. Sometimes in their sleep. Sometimes dramatically, mid-blizzard. Sometimes because they were old, sometimes because they were unlucky. And peasants. They knew death well. But they didn't treat it as some distant concept. Death was part of the room, like smoke or silence. They prepared for it. Talked to it. Made peace with it. When someone died. Candle they were laid out near the hearth, wrapped in their best linen. Candle family prayed, wept, sang. Candle sometimes, jokes were told. Not because they weren't grieving, but because laughing at death was power. And burials? Done fast. Ground frozen or not. Whole villages dug together. Mourning was communal. You weren't expected to be strong. You were expected to show up, and be held. And afterward? You remembered them every single winter, when the fire crackled just right, or the bread burned the way they used to do it. That was memory. That was legacy. Let's lighten it again. You might think medieval peasants were all gloom and hymns, but no, they were hilarious. Because humor is resistance. Speech balloon you joke about the rat stealing your only shoe. Speech balloon you laugh at your neighbor for falling in the slop bucket. Speech balloon you tease the blacksmith for his awful singing that somehow still scares off bandits. Humor was how they processed fear. Imagine this. You're stuck inside, snowed in, no food left but onion scraps. Everyone's miserable. Then someone, maybe the village fool or just your weird cousin, stands up and pretends to be the king of the turnips, delivering a fake royal decree in a terrible French accent. And somehow, it helps. You laugh until you cry. You forget how cold your bones are. You feel alive. That was the real superpower. Not strength. Not stoicism. Joy, in the face of suffering. Ever wonder how medieval peasants remembered everything without books, apps, or TikTok reminders? They used mental architecture, and winter was when those blueprints were passed down. Memory wasn't just personal. It was familial, communal, seasonal. Children learned stories in layers. Firewood songs while chopping sticks. Rooster rhymes while feeding chickens. Knowledge wasn't taught, it was woven into life. Into tasks. Into games. Into jokes. Into lullabies. Winter was the perfect time. The slow time. When mouths moved more than legs. And every word meant survival. It wasn't just about staying alive. It was about staying connected to the people who came before, and making sure the ones who came after didn't forget. Alright, let's play a quick game. You, yes you, get dropped into a medieval village in January. You've got the clothes on your back, your current skill set, and 0 bars of Wi-Fi. Would you make it? Let's break it down. Cooking from scratch with no stove? Making a fire from flint and steel while your fingers are numb? Staying polite while sleeping in a bed with 4 strangers and 2 goats? Comment below, what's your modern skill that might impress a medieval peasant? Or, real talk, would you be the person who says, "Hey guys, maybe we could invent insulation," and then promptly get frostbite from an open window? You made it to the end. You survived a fictional medieval winter. But here's the thing, that world wasn't fiction. Real people lived this. Every single year. They endured not because they had to, but because that's what we do. We adapt. We suffer. We laugh. We love. And even now, in our thermostat lives, there's still something in us that remembers the cold. So tonight, when you're warm and fed and dry, take a second to appreciate the absolute miracle of not being in a 1347 pig barn. And if you are in a pig barn, buddy, I hope it's on purpose. If this journey gave you chills, the good kind, smash that like button like you're pounding grain in the dead of winter. Bell subscribe if you love deep dives with soul. Speech balloon comment below. Would you thrive in a medieval village, or would the goat roommate situation be your breaking point? More strange, beautiful, human history coming your way soon. Until then, stay warm, stay weird, and never forget to pass the story on. You'd think the cold was the worst part of winter nights. It's not. It's the sound. You're lying under a damp wool blanket, your breath fogging up the inside of your blanket tent, and somewhere out there, in the dark, something moves. Creak. Snap. A low moan of wind that sounds just human enough to make your hair stand on end. You try to tell yourself it's just the barn groaning. Just the wind through the trees. Just the dog scratching. But deep down, you wonder if it's a wandering spirit. A cursed traveler. A witch, maybe. Or just some poor soul frozen on the road, still looking for a hearth to haunt. And you don't want to find out. So you do what peasants have always done when terror knocks. You pull the blanket tighter. You whisper the prayer you barely remember. You press your foot against your brother's just to know someone alive is next to you. And you wait for morning like it's salvation. Forget romanticized silence. A medieval winter sounded like tension. The hearth hissing with wet logs. Pots rattling from contraction as they cooled. Oxen shifting and farting in the stall next door. Wind screaming through cracks like it's telling on you to the gods. And then there's the human sounds. Snoring. Coughing. Someone muttering in their sleep. The baby fussing. Someone getting up to pee, again, into the communal chamber pot like it's a sacred rite. Silence. Not a thing. Even in the quiet, the cold made noise. It crept into your joints. Made your jaw click. Made your skin stretch like old parchment. The whole house was alive with discomfort. You never really rested. You just paused the suffering long enough to do it again tomorrow. Here's the underrated medieval peasant superpower: improvisation. No screwdrivers. You sharpen a spoon. No shovel. You use a flat rock and an unhealthy amount of spite. Need a door hinge? Take your only knife and a piece of boiled leather and make it happen. If something broke in winter, there was no running to the store. You used rope made from bark, glue from hooves, a burnt stick to write emergency messages on slate or wood. Every household had that one genius granddad who could fix a cartwheel with nothing but a fishbone and a curse. You don't get TikTok life hacks. You get literal life-saving hacks. Honestly, some of them were kind of brilliant. You know how people say crisis makes faith stronger? Not always. Sometimes, huddled in the dark, you questioned everything. Why would God let your brother freeze? Why hasn't that prayer worked? You've said it 30 times. Why does the priest get wine while your family gets snow mold? These weren't whispered rebellions. These were soul-deep mutterings in the pitch of night. But here's the thing, faith didn't have to be clean or pretty. It was messy, mudded, bitten by frost. Some peasants clung harder. Some got sarcastic with their saints. Some turned to folk rituals and old gods they weren't supposed to believe in anymore. Because when you're surrounded by death, hunger, and an endless night, even a half-believed charm is better than nothing. Sleeping beside your siblings all winter long sounds sweet, right? Until you live it. Your sister steals the blanket. Your brother kicks in his sleep. You all argue about who farted, who's snoring, and who forgot to plug the draft hole behind the pig feed. But it wasn't all rage. You learned to read each other's moods with a glance. Shared inside jokes about the tanner's weird toe. Told stories under your breath when you couldn't sleep. You annoyed each other like champions, but you'd also fight a wolf bare-handed if one of them screamed. Siblinghood in a peasant hut? A combination of battlefield camaraderie, soap opera drama, and shared trauma therapy. You don't want to believe in monsters. But when the livestock won't settle, when a shadow moves behind the woodshed, when you find a track in the snow that's not human or animal, you start to wonder. The wild hunt, they called it. Frost demons, some said. Or the night hags, coming for the warmth of your soul. And whether or not it was real, fear was. It felt real. It shaped choices. So you put ashes in a circle around the door. Hung nails tied with red string from the eaves. Whispered warnings to the wind, just in case it was listening. Were these things true? Who cares? They made you feel safer. And sometimes, that was enough. And then, sometimes, there was stillness. A morning so cold and clear you could see your breath hang in the air like suspended lace. A frost pattern on the window that looked like angel feathers. A quiet moment of peace, holding a mug of hot ale, watching the first light touch the thatch roof. Peasants noticed that stuff. They didn't write sonnets about it, they were busy not dying, but they felt it. Beauty in survival. Grace in the grime. It wasn't romantic. But it was real. And sometimes, just sometimes, the cold brought clarity, that strange sense of being alive, small, and unshakably human. So let's be honest. Could you really handle a medieval winter? Not just the cold, the boredom, the fear, the responsibility, the lack of deodorant? Could you hold a dying goat and pretend you weren't crying? Could you stitch your own sock with pig gut thread by firelight? Could you keep singing, keep cooking, keep hoping, when the world outside your door was frozen solid? Maybe. Maybe not. But here's what's wild. Someone did. Many someones. Over hundreds of years. And that's the story they left behind. Let's talk about the kind of dreams you have after 3 days of barley gruel, a fever, and sleeping on a straw mattress next to a coughing uncle. They aren't dreams. They're visions. You're flying over fields you've never seen. Talking to saints in broken Latin. Chased by wolves made of fire. Kissing someone you've never met. Digging tunnels through ice with bare hands, and waking up mid-dig, curled in a fetal position, scratching at the floorboards. Peasants didn't write dream journals. But you can bet they had stories. Nightmares were omens, visions were messages, and everyone had that one dream that stayed with them for life. You just dream about heated car seats and microwaved pizza. Now let's get loud again. Because believe it or not, winter wasn't all misery. There were festivals, loud, raucous, rebellious ones. Snowman / Saints feast days became excuses to dance, drink, and flirt. Fire Candlemas lit the dark with songs and flame. Performing arts and in the depths of despair, Feast of Fools, where peasants mocked the lords, dressed like bishops, and turned the church into a stage for comedy, chaos, and very bad decisions. It wasn't just fun. It was resistance. Winter wanted you quiet. You yelled. Winter tried to bury you. You painted your face and sang dirtier songs. One good laugh, one stolen kiss, one night of too much cider, could fuel a whole month of trudging through frozen mud. Okay, let's go dark. Really dark. Because people died in winter. Often. And when they did, you couldn't dig the ground. The earth was stone. So, you improvised. Bodies stored in barns. Wrapped in cloth and herbs to fight the smell. Sometimes buried under the floor of the church if you had coin, or just left in the cold until the thaw. There were rituals, even in hardship. You lit tallow candles. You wept, not just for the dead, but because the rest of you still had to keep going. You whispered prayers and promises and secrets to the unmoving face of someone who, just days ago, was splitting kindling next to you. Death didn't wait for good weather. And mourning wasn't a luxury, it was a survival skill. Yes, there was love. No, it was not sexy. Yes, that makes it better. Romance in a peasant winter meant red heart / shared mittens. Red heart / peeling turnips together and pretending that's not wildly intimate. Red heart / offering someone your only clean scarf like it's a royal gift. First kisses happened in haylofts. Proposals were whispered next to the hearth. And weddings? Rare in winter, but when they happened, everyone showed up, because joy was contagious. Love wasn't an escape. It was a declaration. I see you. I pick you. Even when we're both wearing 3 layers of rags and your nose is bleeding from the cold. Medieval peasants didn't swipe right. They swiped wool lice off each other's collars. Now that's romance. Not everyone slept with a dog in their bed because it was cute. Sometimes, that dog was your only heating system. Animals weren't pets in the modern sense. They were partners. Survival collaborators. Cats hunted mice before they got into the grain stores. Dogs guarded the door from wolves, bandits, and that one guy from 2 villages over. Goats, well, goats were chaos, but they gave milk an attitude. You learned your animals' moods better than your own. You whispered to them in the dark. When one died, whether by blade or frost, it hit hard. In winter, animals weren't luxuries. They were lifelines. They gave warmth, food, and a reason to keep moving. And then, one day, something changed. It's so small, you almost miss it. A trickle of water where snow used to sit. A bird call, just one, that splits the silence like glass cracking. Steam rising from the manure pile like it's alive again. The thatch stops dripping. The wind shifts. Someone dares to smile. You don't celebrate. Not yet. That would jinx it. But inside, in your gut, in your bones, you feel the season turning. You survived another winter. Not with grace. Not with glamour. But with dirt under your nails, a song half remembered, and a soul full of smoke and prayer. Modern life gives you warmth at the press of a button. But here's what those medieval nights taught. Fire warmth is not just physical. It's in stories, shared by firelight. It's in your grandmother's hands, stitching your sock back together. It's in defiance. In laughter. In love, scrawled in mud. You don't have to freeze to appreciate heat. But sometimes, to feel truly alive, you need to imagine what it's like to nearly lose it. So tonight, when you crawl under your electric blanket, remember the people who faced a world without comfort, and still danced, still joked, still hoped. They lived. And because of that, so do you. Speech balloon, what moment in this medieval journey stuck with you the most? Let me know in the comments, and if you've got stories from your own winter hellscapes, power outages, camping trips gone wrong, your worst Christmas sweater emergency, drop them below. Hit like if you're now emotionally attached to your radiator. Subscribe for more beautifully dark and absurd history. And remember, survival isn't always about strength. Sometimes, it's about the small fires you keep lit inside you. Alright, we've talked about romance, death, cows, and cabbage. But what about the kids? Let's be honest, being a child in medieval winter wasn't all snowball fights and stick-sword battles. You, little peasant child, are 6 years old and already have a job. Feeding the chickens. Scraping the soot from the cooking pot. And trying not to burn yourself on the firestone that warms the family's only blanket. Your toys? A carved twig. A rock with personality. Maybe a rat you've named Sir Whiskers. But, get this, you still play. Even in the cold, even hungry, even tired. You and your siblings make up rhymes. You sled on frozen dung piles. You dare each other to touch the church bell with your tongue, don't ask how that ends. And if someone gifts you a single apple for Christmas, you believe in magic. Children didn't have childhoods like we think of them today, but they had imagination, they had mischief, and they had hope like firelight, small, flickering, but stubbornly there. Let's get a little spooky. Because winter wasn't just physically cold, it was spiritually thin. People believed this was when the veil between the worlds wore down. Spirits wandered. Saints watched. Demons whispered. So you take precautions. You hang a dried bundle of herbs over the door. You bury an iron nail under the hearth. You whisper charms into the dark while stirring soup clockwise, never counter. You never spin yarn after sundown, lest the night hag twist it around your neck. And if something bad happens, You blame it on a passing owl, a cursed footprint in the snow, or that one neighbor who's always muttering to herself and owns too many cats. Were these things real? Depends on who you ask. But when winter is long and brutal and nothing makes sense, belief is just another tool in the survival kit. Sometimes, magic isn't about superstition. It's about control. Okay. Let's say the stores are empty. The root cellar's a joke. You've gnawed every crust down to sawdust. The mice packed up and left weeks ago. Now what? This is the point where you get creative, or desperate. You boil tree bark. You stew nettles. You scrape moss off rocks and fry it with bacon fat, assuming you have fat. Some folks ate rats. Others chewed leather, not as protein, just to fool their stomach into thinking something was happening. And sometimes, you didn't eat. You just waited. And hoped. And made tea out of pine needles for vitamin C, because someone's grandma swore by it and that's good enough. Still feeling smug about your Uber Eats account? Let's zoom in. It's 2 a.m. The fire's low. Everyone's asleep. And for once, everything is still. No traffic. No hum of appliances. No glowing screens. Just the slow crackle of the hearth and the occasional snore. This is winter's other side, not brutal, but quiet. Almost holy. You lie there, wrapped in wool, staring at shadows on the ceiling. Listening to the house breathe. Listening to yourself. And what do you think about? The same things you do now. Love. Fear. Regret. Whether next year will be better. Sometimes, someone whispers a story in the dark, not for entertainment, but for comfort. And for a moment, it's enough. For a moment, the stillness is warm. You know what's funny? We look back at medieval peasants like they were miserable, ignorant, toothless scarecrows. But the truth. They were resilient, adaptive, creative as hell. They had ingenious ways to stretch food, deeply intimate relationships with land and season, and communities that didn't just survive hardship, they expected it. You call your friends when your furnace goes out. They called theirs when the cows froze, the flour turned black, and the priest had the plague. You panic buy batteries. They lit candles and sang through the dark. They weren't better. But they weren't weaker, either. They were human. Just like you. So, what can we take from all this? First, gratitude. For warmth. For food. For the ability to press play on a video and escape into history. Second, humility. Because if you had to live like them tomorrow, it would break you, or forge you into something harder and wiser than you expected. Third, connection. They didn't survive winter alone. Neither should you. Text a friend. Bring soup to someone. Learn to light a fire, metaphorical or literal. Tell stories in the dark. Because medieval peasants, they didn't just survive cold nights. They carried each other through them. Fire if this journey into the cold gave you chills, the historical kind. Hit that like button like it's your last dry match. Speech balloon, tell me in the comments. Could you handle a medieval winter for real? What would break you first? The cold, the food, or the lack of YouTube? So you thought winter might mean rest. No. The chores don't stop, they just get colder, heavier, and more miserable. Before the sun even rises, you're up, tugging on the same stiff boots you wore yesterday. Still damp, still crusted with manure, still somehow colder inside than outside. Today's task list. Break the ice on the water trough, again. Shake snow off the thatch roof before it collapses. Haul firewood from the lean-to, slipping on frozen chicken poop. Crush dried grain into meal with numb fingers. Try not to cry while milking a goat that clearly hates you. And that's before breakfast, which is probably just more barley mush. Winter didn't pause life. It complicated it. Every small task became a test. How long can you keep doing this without collapsing? The answer. Longer than you think. Because you have no choice. Let's pause. Let's take you back not through history, but through sensation. Snowflake #touch. The burn of wind on your cheeks. The ache in your knuckles as they split open, again, and again, and again. The waxy warmth of holding your hands too close to the fire. The constant, damp itch of wool. Nose smell. Smoke. Stale sweat. Pickled cabbage. Animal dung. Boiled turnips. Wet wood. A candle made from rancid fat. You miss the scent of anything fresh. Anything green. Ear sound. Wind howling through every crack in the wall. The creak of rafters. Crows arguing over frozen scraps. Someone coughing, always, someone coughing. And under it all, silence like deep snow, total, eerie, and final. Tongue taste. Salt. Fat. Ash. The grit of flour that wasn't sifted. The strange sour tang of turnips that should have been thrown out. The pure joy of a dried apple, sucked slowly like it's candy from heaven. Eyesight. Grey. Brown. Bone. Smoke curling like ghosts above the hearth. Pale fingers. Eyes rimmed with red. The flicker of firelight on someone's cracked lips as they mouth a bedtime prayer they barely believe anymore. Still think you'd survive? Peasants had no power. But that doesn't mean they were powerless. They resisted, not with swords, but with sass. Pretending not to understand Latin laws. Accidentally letting the Lord's sheep go missing. Refusing to tithe on the one chicken that didn't die that winter. Whispering jokes about the bishop's weird haircut around the fire. Every quiet protest was its own kind of warmth. A way to say, you may rule me, but you don't own all of me. Because when the world presses down on you with snow, frost, rent, famine, and plague, you find little ways to press back. Let's talk about your body. Because winter doesn't just affect your mood, it reshapes you. You've lost weight. Of course you have. Everyone has. Your skin's pale, stretched tight over cheekbones, your nails brittle, your hair greasy because soap is a summer luxury. And yet, you adapt. Your body learns to burn fuel slower. You stop craving sweetness and start dreaming about fat. You wrap rags around your legs and tie them with twine because socks are for rich people. You build calluses on your knees from kneeling to pray, scrub, beg, gather. You feel cold all the time. But you still rise, walk, lift, hold. It's not pretty. But it is human. Winter stripped you down. So what did you cling to? Faith, mostly, even if it was cracked and complicated. You prayed to saints who died long ago. You whispered novenas to Mary by candlelight. You crossed yourself at every shadow. You didn't believe the world was just, but you hoped it could be just after. But even faith wobbled. Sometimes, you cursed God in the dark. Sometimes, you made deals with saints like a peasant lawyer. Sometimes, you just stared at the rafters and thought, if I die tonight, let it be quick. Still, the next morning, you rose. You walked. You did the chores again. And that, honestly, might be the deepest kind of faith there is. And then, drip. You hear it. One drop of water from the eaves. Then another. Then a whole chorus. The snow is receding. The mud is returning. The chickens are louder. The cows are restless. You peel off one layer of clothing and it feels scandalous. You dare to plant something. You stare at the sun like it's an old friend. You taste the air, it's still cold, but there's something new in it. Green. For the first time in months, you smile without irony. Because spring isn't just a season. It's proof. Proof that the world turns. That suffering doesn't last forever. That warmth comes back, not fast, not easily, but reliably. And so do you. So, one last time. Could you have survived a medieval winter? Maybe. Maybe not. But don't just measure yourself by what you can endure. Measure by what you protect. What you hold on to when everything around you freezes. What tiny warmth you refuse to let die. In your heart, in your family, in your community. Because medieval peasants, they weren't immortal. They weren't magical. They were us, with fewer choices, but the same instincts. To keep going. To love anyway. To sing when it made no sense. To survive until spring. And maybe, in some strange, stubborn way, that's all we really need to do too. Fire still here? You, my friend, would definitely be the one keeping the fire lit in a medieval longhouse. If you loved this journey through the frostbitten past, hit that like button like it's your only source of heat. Speech balloon comment below. What part of peasant winter life shocked you the most? Or, what would your medieval survival specialty be? Cooking, mending, storytelling, goat wrangling? Scroll and don't forget to subscribe for more stories that unfreeze the forgotten corners of history. Because winter didn't just freeze your water, it also crammed everyone into a one-room house for weeks on end. Romantic? Occasionally. Mostly, awkward. You and your spouse? You sleep fully clothed, side by side, not because it's sexy, but because if you roll too far from each other, you might literally wake up with frostbite. Also sharing the bed. 2 kids. A dog. Maybe your grandma. And possibly a chicken with anxiety issues. Privacy? That's a myth. Affection had to be discreet, quick, and quiet, or hilariously brazen. And if you're courting someone? Winter means standing outside their cottage, stomping your feet in the snow, trying not to say something dumb while your nose drips. You might gift her a carved spoon. Or a poem you scratched into birch bark with a nail. Swoon. Romance was humble. But sincere. Because if someone's willing to share their last root vegetable with you, that's love. Let's give credit where it's due. In winter, women weren't just surviving, they were holding everything together. You're a medieval woman? You're spinning wool by the firelight until your fingers cramp. Kneading sourdough like it owes you money. Healing coughs with herbs you dried last summer. Whispering lullabies through cracked lips. Memorizing prayers and recipes and rumors, passing them on in a language of action. You keep inventory in your head. You patch socks with thread made from your own hair. You notice when the baby's cough turns wet. You notice everything. In the male-centric records of the time, you're invisible. But in reality, you're the axis. The reason the house, the family, the story, doesn't collapse. Let's talk Headspace. Because winter isn't just outside. It gets in you. Days are short. Nights are long. Your dreams blur with your chores. You feel heavy. Time warps. You wake up unsure what day it is. Doesn't matter. There's a sameness to the dark. Your world shrinks to the size of the hearth. Some peasants sang more in winter. Some went quiet. Some carved strange patterns into walls. Some told ghost stories to explain the shadow inside their minds. Was it depression? Cabin fever? Soul weather? Yes. But no one used those words. You just felt it. And you kept going. Because feeling bad wasn't a luxury. It was just another weight you carried like a bucket of snow melt. And you weren't alone in it. That mattered more than anyone could explain. Yes, not all of winter was suffering. Sometimes, in the middle of the worst cold, people said, "To hell with it. Let's eat." Feasts were less about abundance, more about defiance. A communal roast on St. Brigid's Day. A Yule ale tasting like spiced mud and redemption. A wild boar cooked by the entire village, or at least, whatever pig was dumb enough to be caught. Everyone showed up, barefoot, hungry, tipsy, and gleeful. Peasants sang ribald songs, told jokes about monks' bald spots, and wore leaves on their heads like idiots. For a few hours, winter lost. And honestly, that's the point. Rituals didn't need to make logical sense. They made emotional sense. You needed one day to forget the grind. Just one. Then you could go back to being cold and heroic again. Let's not sugarcoat it, some didn't make it. There were no public obituaries. No hospital wards. No social media tributes. Just silence. A neighbor who didn't answer their door. A child who stopped coughing, then stopped breathing. A grave dug shallow in frozen ground, marked with a stone or a wooden cross, or nothing at all. They didn't all die dramatically. Some faded. Quietly. And still, life continued. Because it had to. Grief lived next to gratitude. You could cry one night and laugh the next morning. The village didn't erase the lost, they carried them. Every lullaby, every prayer, every recipe passed down, carried. So when you light your fire today, remember, you're warming yourself with more than wood. You're warming yourself with memory. When spring finally arrives, it doesn't knock gently. It erupts. One morning you hear it, birdsong like gossip in the trees. Crocuses punching through slush like tiny revolutionaries. Mud everywhere, glorious and disgusting. You run your fingers through wet earth like it's gold. You sit outside for the first time and cry without knowing why. You hear laughter from across the fields and you don't flinch, it feels normal again. You made it. Your hands are still chapped. You're still thin. But the sun feels like a benediction. And the village, your village, looks a little stronger than before. Spring doesn't erase winter. It rewards it. Let's step back, all the way back. Why tell this story? Why relive the smoke, the cold, the endless porridge? Because we forget. We forget how tough we can be. We forget how humans once survived not with tech, but with togetherness. With stubbornness. With one joke, one spoonful, one song at a time. Maybe your winter isn't made of snow. Maybe it's bills. Loneliness. Uncertainty. Silence. The answer. Same as it was then. Keep the fire going. Let others share its warmth. Never underestimate your own resilience. Medieval peasants didn't survive because they were special. They survived because they refused not to. You wake up coughing, not the dry kind. The wet, crackling kind that feels like you're drowning a little. Congratulations. It's winter, and you're sick. Again. You could pray. You could cry. Or you could visit the healer. Let's meet her. She's 62 years old, smells like garlic, and is chewing on something suspiciously rooty. She's treated everything from goat births to infected arrow wounds, with varying success. You sit on her stool, and she starts inspecting you like a chicken she's considering for dinner. Too much black bile, she mutters. You've been sleeping with damp feet. She spits in a pot and hands you a mixture of boiled onion, crushed nettle, and goose grease. You drink it. Not because it tastes good, it doesn't, but because she believes in it, and sometimes belief is half the cure. Modern medicine? Nope. But the village midwife and the hedge witch and the traveling monk doctor? They kept people alive when there were no hospitals. And weirdly, some of their treatments worked. Nettle tea, anti-inflammatory, honey on wounds, antibacterial, garlic, natural antibiotic. They didn't always know why, but they knew what helped. Kind of like your grandma's chicken soup, only with more frog spit. When winter came, faith wasn't optional, it was survival strategy. You wake up before dawn to the bells of a frost-covered church. Inside, the air is as cold as your breath, but the priest is lighting candles with trembling fingers. The altar glows dimly. It smells like incense and damp stone and wax, ancient, sacred. You kneel beside your neighbors, murmuring prayers, half of them Latin, half of them whispered pleading. Faith wasn't some cozy abstraction. It was, please let my child survive this fever. Please let the rye sprout come spring. Please let the wolves avoid the village. People fasted. People lit candles in windows. People believed saints could walk among them in snowstorms or appear in dreams, wearing cloaks of ice. And when Christmas came, it was fierce joy, not the sanitized version, but singing carols at midnight under frozen stars, huddling together for Mass, carving one extra slice of bread to leave for the Holy Family, just in case. Faith was not passive. It was fought for every night you were afraid. Let's not forget the unsung heroes of winter survival, the animals. Because, honestly, your livestock weren't just food, they were teammates. That half-frozen cow in the stable? She's providing you with the only fresh thing in your diet, milk that smells slightly of hay and desperation. The chickens? They slow down in the cold, but every now and then one lays a miracle egg. The dog. Not a pet, a guard, a rat hunter, a blanket with teeth. And the cat. Probably demonic. Definitely useful. Still lives a better winter than you. You talk to them. Of course you do. Sometimes they answer. And yes, you thank them. Not because you're weird, but because you know. If the goat dies, your family might too. These creatures are not livestock. They are family. Sometimes, they're warmer than your siblings. Definitely smell better. Night in medieval winter was not Netflix and chill. It was cosmic. You sit by the dying fire, wrapped in every layer you own. The wind outside sounds like it's angry at you personally. The stars overhead are brutally clear, cruel, glittering pinholes in a black velvet sky. There is no light pollution. No background noise. Just darkness, full and absolute. And in that darkness, you imagine things. You see your dead grandfather watching from the tree line. You hear stories of fairies who lead travelers astray. You feel watched. But also, you dream. You dream big. You tell stories with your family. You recite tales of saints, of brave hunters, of miracle bread that lasted 9 days. You remember who you are. Night strips you of distractions and leaves you raw, but somehow, more you. And when morning finally comes, it feels like resurrection. So, what does any of this matter? You're not sleeping next to pigs. You're not worried about wolves. You have indoor plumbing and an electric kettle. But you do know the feeling of isolation, darkness, hoping tomorrow is better than today. You get cold, just not always from weather. And the peasants. They had something we forget. Sparkles ritual. Community. Fire resilience. They didn't push through winter alone. They leaned into it. They acknowledged it. So maybe don't fight your hard seasons. Maybe make tea from nettles, or from what you have. Tell a story. Light a candle. Invite someone to share the dark with you. You don't have to be medieval to survive like one. You just have to refuse to give up. This whole time, we've talked about how peasants survived the coldest nights. But maybe we're asking the wrong question. Maybe the real question is, how do we carry their fire into our own dark nights? Because the cold comes for all of us eventually. Not just as weather, but as heartbreak, grief, confusion, loneliness. And when it does, you have a choice. Go numb. Or go warm. Be the one who stokes the fire. Be the one who remembers the songs. Who makes food stretch. Who shares a coat. Who tells the story that gets someone through the worst night of their life. Because winter doesn't last forever. But the stories we pass through it, those last. Fade to black. One flickering candle remains. Then silence. Okay, time out. So far, it's been frostbite, smoke, and spiritual agony. But let's not forget, even in the bleakest winters, people still knew how to have fun. That's right. You're not just a miserable peasant. You're a creative, miserable peasant. How do you pass the time when it's too dark to work, too cold to think, and you've heard your uncle's ghost story for the 400th time? Games. You grab bones, literal sheep knuckle bones, and toss them like ancient dice. You bet on the outcome. No money. Bet chores. Or dignity. You play riddles. I'm born of earth, live in wood, but die in fire. What am I? A candle. Or your last nerve. And when the snow really starts to pile high, the village kids organize a sled race down the nearest icy hill, using old barrels or flat boards. No helmets. No brakes. No regrets. Fun was homemade. And loud. And often dangerous. Basically, medieval jackass. Now imagine this. It's been snowing for 3 straight days. You haven't seen the sun since last Thursday. Your fingers are numb, your back hurts, and you're bored. What do? You make stuff. Your mother hands you a spindle. Your father carves spoon number 78. Winter is not just for resting, it's for preparing. So you spin wool, knit socks, make fishing nets, repair tools, carve toys for your siblings, twist rope from bark fibers, and patch that same hole in the cloak again, even though you swear it's growing back. Crafting is survival and therapy. Plus, let's be honest, there's nothing more satisfying than wearing socks you made from a sheep you helped shear, and you didn't even cry during the spinning lesson this time. You're thriving. In the most peasant way possible. Now let's get personal. Because under all those layers of wool, smoke, and cabbage breath, you dream. You may be a peasant, but you are not stupid. You lie awake some nights staring at the rafters, listening to mice scratch in the thatch, and you wonder, what if I became a traveling singer? What if I carved something so beautiful and noble noticed me? What if next winter, we had 2 pigs instead of 1? You dream of love, of land, of freedom. You tell yourself stories, not just to pass time, but to build the version of yourself that might be real someday. You imagine warmer places. You imagine cities, books, warm baths. And when you wake, you make porridge. Again. But that tiny ember of ambition? It's still glowing under the ashes. Okay, now for the spooky bit. Because long, dark winters were not just physically hard, they were spiritually thin. People believed that during the coldest nights, the veil between worlds wore away like an old cloak. And things slipped through. You know the stories. You've heard of the Wild Hunt, a ghostly procession across the skies, led by ancient spirits or angry gods. The Nis, little household creatures who helped with chores, if you left them porridge. Witches who cursed your cow with a look. Souls that wandered if they didn't get proper burial rites. Bells that rang when no one pulled the rope. You wear charms around your neck. Hang herbs over the door. You don't whistle indoors. You don't look in mirrors at night. And when your cousin swears he saw lights dancing in the woods during a blizzard, you believe him. Because belief was a survival tool. And fear. Fear kept you alive. It's February. Everything is still. You step outside the cottage in the middle of the night, not for anything dramatic. Just to breathe. The sky above you is brutally clear. Black and silver. Stars so sharp they could cut you. You can see your breath float away like a soul. The village is silent. Not asleep. Silent. The snow under your boots doesn't crunch. It sighs. And for just one moment, you feel completely alone. Not lonely, just small. And then, behind you, a door creaks. Someone steps out, your sister, your friend, your father, and silently hands you a hot drink in a wooden cup. You sip. Nothing is said. But somehow, everything is understood. That's what winter taught you. You don't need much. You just need each other. So here we are. You survived the coldest nights. Not because you had magic. Not because you were stronger than others. But because you kept going. You leaned on people. You cooked weird soup. You burned things and told stories and wore 7 layers and made things with your hands and sang songs your grandmother taught you in a language nobody writes down anymore. You were poor. You were cold. You were powerful. And now, back in the present day, maybe we need that spirit more than ever. Because even with central heating, Wi-Fi, and caffeine on demand, the modern world can feel just as frozen. And our survival still depends on warmth. Not from the thermostat. From each other. So if your season feels long, your hope feels thin, your fire feels low, remember the peasant in you. They made it through worse. And they didn't even have socks with elastic. Fire, if this episode warmed you, even a little, hit that like button. Speech balloon, drop a comment. What's your modern version of a winter survival trick? #hash or, better yet, what peasant nickname would you own proudly? Muddy Meg. Tallow Tom. Froze my nose Fred. Pushpin subscribe for more human stories, dark humor, and weird little windows into history that make the present a little less lonely. So, what about the kids? Little peasants, barefoot, muddy, occasionally sticky, who are stuck indoors with no YouTube, no Minecraft, and no plastic toys. How do they survive? Simple, chaotic energy and zero fear of splinters. They chase each other through haylofts. They build snow monsters out of manure and icicles. They play games like steal your sibling's bread or guess what's in the sack. Spoiler, it's always turnips. And when they're not raising hell, they are learning. By age 7, a peasant child knows how to split firewood, spin wool, carry buckets, trap rats, and avoid the angry geese that guard the yard like feathered demons. You're not just a kid. You're workforce in training. Your toys? Twigs. Rocks. Maybe a carved little man that looks like your dad if he was made by someone half asleep. But here's the thing, you still laugh. A lot. Kids don't need much to spark wonder, just space to run and someone who loves them enough to share the last spoon of porridge. Let's get back to the kitchen, or what passes for one. Because let's be honest, surviving winter wasn't just about what you had, it was about what you could make from nothing. There's no corner store. No fridge. No Uber Eats. You've got salted fish, barley flour, fermented cabbage, a carrot with an attitude. But you're not panicking. Oh no. You're about to cook up a meal that would scare Gordon Ramsay, but it'll fill bellies. Enter pottage. It's the peasant's answer to everything. Basically a stew made with whatever is. White heavy check mark edible. White heavy check mark available. White heavy check mark not already fuzzy. You throw in beans, roots, maybe a piece of old bacon if you're lucky, and stir it all day until it tastes like survival. Other winter staples? Dried apples, strung like necklaces from the rafters. Pickled turnips, yes, that's a thing. Black bread so dense it could double as a weapon. Gruel, which sounds bad, and is. But when you're cold and hungry, these things are miracles. And every spoonful? A reminder that even poverty can invent something warm. Okay, real talk. When you're trapped inside for months with the same 5 people, someone's going to lose it. Enter medieval gossip. Peasants may have lacked running water, but they had piping hot tea, metaphorically. You whisper over weaving. Did you hear what that miller's wife did with the priest's gloves? You trade stories like currency. You decode glances like they're scripture. You throw passive-aggressive shade with a comment like, "Nice stitching, for someone who's nearly blind." Feuds bloom like frostbite. So-and-so took too much firewood. Someone else borrowed a goat and never gave it back. That family sings too loudly at night. Drama is the only entertainment left after the soup runs out. But weirdly, these messy, petty little dynamics are what keep the village alive. You need each other, and sometimes that means yelling before hugging. Grudges melt by spring, mostly. Let's not sugarcoat it. Sometimes, the cold wins. You wake up one morning and your neighbor's chimney never lit. You knock on the door. No answer. Inside, it's silent. And still. A blanket of snow covers everything, even grief. Medieval winter funerals were deeply human. Wrapped in cloth, the dead were carried on simple biers, sometimes through snow waist deep. Family followed with lanterns. There was no embalming. No casket showroom. Just prayers, candles, and cold hands clutching rosaries. The village priest said the rites. The earth was frozen, so sometimes graves were dug with pickaxes, or bodies were kept in cold storage. Yes, medieval people did that, until burial was possible. And then, you moved on. Because you had to. You told stories about them. You passed on their mittens. You whispered their name when the wind got loud. And you lived, for them. So, picture this. It's the end of February. Your candle is burning low. The floor is packed earth. Your feet are wrapped in wool and hope. You're alive. You've chopped, scraped, bartered, begged, prayed, wept, laughed, and eaten boiled turnip way too often. And something amazing happens. You start to hear, dripping, snow melting from the roof. The first whisper of not winter. You walk outside. The wind is still cruel, but the sun, faint, pale, miraculous, touches your face. You close your eyes. You've made it. Spring is coming. Not here yet, but near enough to smell. And now, you know something most people never will. How to survive without guarantees. How to stay human without heat. How to keep going when all you have is stubbornness and soup. You are the fire. You are the story. You are the warmth in someone else's darkest hour. So maybe you're watching this from a heated apartment with a latte in one hand and DoorDash on the way. Or maybe you're not. Maybe this winter, literal or emotional, feels like more than you can handle. Remember this. You come from a line of people who ate turnips and survived, carried water through snowdrifts, loved, lost, and lived in the dark with only candlelight and bread crusts. You're not just a descendant of survivors, you are one. So when the cold creeps in, whether it's outside or in your heart, do what they did. Light the fire. Share what you've got. Sing anyway. And wait for spring. It's always coming. And yet, something about hardship brings people together. Thatched roofs leak. Livestock stink. Your hands are chapped. Your nose runs. But you still notice her smile across the hearth. You still sneak glances at the boy fixing the fence with his hair frozen in icicles. And sometimes, a winter wedding happens. Yep. Even in February. Why? Because by then, the larder's been inventoried, debts tallied, and it's a convenient time, between planting and lambing season. The feast. Modest. Barley bread. Ale someone's uncle brewed in a suspicious barrel. A roast chicken if you're lucky, or at least one-legged. Dried apple slices, dipped in honey and hope. There's singing. A local fiddle. Maybe someone recites a bawdy ballad about a ploughman and a nun, poorly censored. And the couple? They're not marrying for castles or coin. They are marrying for warmth. Shared boots. Maybe a goat. That's love. Not glamorous, but real. You fall asleep under too many layers, with a stomach half full and a heart half worried. And then you dream. In medieval winter, dreams weren't just dreams. They were omens. Messages. Whispers from the beyond. You dream of fire, you tell your neighbor. She nods solemnly. That means a baby's coming. You dream of wolves. A betrayal, your brother mutters. You dream of a clear blue sky. Good crops, says the village elder. Dreams mattered. Especially in the months when you had so little light to go on. And they weren't always metaphor. Sometimes, your brain just wanted to take you somewhere warm, the coast of Normandy, the feast of St. Martin, or the time someone in the village tripped over a goose and made a sound you still imitate to this day. In dreams, peasants could be kings, or dancers, or falconers, or free. And in the deepest cold? Sometimes, that was enough. You hear it before you see it, a rhythmic tap of boots on frozen mud, a faint whistle. Then a figure appears on the horizon. A traveler, cloaked in patchwork. A lyre slung on their back. Maybe a harp. Maybe a sack of riddles. It's a minstrel, or what we'd call a traveling performer. And in winter, they are gold. They bring songs you've never heard. News from 4 villages over. Jokes that make your mother blush. The only new stories in months. They perform by firelight, in the barn, in the hall, wherever people can gather. You sit, mesmerized. They sing of doomed lovers, trickster foxes, holy relics lost in blizzards, and queens who outwit devils. You forget your frozen toes. You laugh. You cry. You give them bread and a place to sleep. And in return, they remind you that your story matters too. Not everything in medieval winter was prayer and porridge. Some customs, weird, dark, deliciously pagan. Like Candle Hash Plough Monday, where kids drag a plough through the village demanding coins, or else they plough your front yard. Chaos. Mud. Kind of adorable. Herb wassailing, a rowdy cider-fueled ritual where people sing to apple trees to wake them up and bless the coming harvest. Yes, you sing to trees. Yes, it gets loud. Japanese ogre the wild hunt, a ghostly procession believed to storm the skies in midwinter. Seeing it meant bad luck, or death. So you didn't look up during snowstorms. Just in case. Fire bonfires for Bridget. In some places, the old goddess-turned-saint was honored with flame and bread, ensuring warmth would return. Winter wasn't just about survival. It was about holding on to magic, even when everything around you screamed otherwise. It's mid-March. You're still cold, still tired. But something's different. The mud's a little softer. The crows are louder. The sun stays 5 minutes longer before dipping behind the hills. Then you spot it. A green sprout. Just one. Pushing up through the frozen earth like it doesn't know it's supposed to be dead. You stare at it. And then you laugh. Because you feel something dangerous. Something unfamiliar. Hope. You tell your family. Your neighbor. The priest. You point to the sprout like it's the Messiah himself. Because after everything, the frostbite, the hunger, the nights you couldn't feel your toes, this little green thing dares to keep going. And so do you. So here we are. 600 years later. Warm screen. Full inbox. Electric light. But inside you, there's still a piece of them, those rag-wrapped, iron-willed, soot-smudged survivors who made it through the longest winters without quitting. They didn't wait for comfort. They made it. With bare hands and strong backs and strange soup. You don't have to live in a wattle and daub hut to carry that legacy. You just have to. Show up when things are bleak. Laugh when there's no reason to. Share what you've got, even if it's small. Keep singing. Keep dreaming. Keep going. Because medieval peasants weren't weak. They were the definition of resilient. And you're made of the same stuff. Okay, quick question. You're in a tiny, ice-cold village. The woods are pitch black. You hear a howl. Is it a wolf? A spirit? Your cousin Carl doing that weird voice again? In medieval Europe, chances are, it was all three. Because winter. It wasn't just cold, it was haunted. You'd hang iron above the door. Bury a chicken bone under the threshold. And never, under any circumstance, say the name of a local witch out loud. The nights were long, and your imagination got louder the colder it got. Some winter superstitions you might have lived by. Don't whistle after sunset, it invites spirits. Don't spin yarn on Christmas Eve, you'll summon a spider demon. If a candle burns blue, someone nearby is about to die. Sleep tight. You kept rosemary in your pockets. Chalked crosses over windows. Why? Because when it's freezing and there's no Netflix, your brain gets creative. Fear kept people careful. And sometimes, alive. While the men chopped wood, grumbled about snow, and occasionally froze their beards solid. The women ran the world. Especially in winter. They were the weavers of more than just cloth. They wove the village's invisible safety net. You're a peasant woman in February. That means you're drying herbs from the attic rafters. Teaching your daughter how to spin wool without snapping her fingers off. Sharing midwife knowledge over bread baking. Managing the entire household while pretending your husband knows what he's doing. And if someone's child gets sick, or the cow won't birth, or a strange rash appears, guess who the village turns to? Exactly. The women shared knowledge in murmurs, stories, songs. And yes, gossip, which, historically, has saved more lives than people give it credit for. Winter was a time of quiet power. And they carried it, barefoot on frozen floors, with ash on their aprons and fire in their eyes. Here's the reality they don't show in romantic medieval movies. Babies don't wait for spring. You're 9 months pregnant. It's mid-January. The wind is screaming like a banshee outside. And guess what? It's time. There's no hospital. No epidural. No electric blanket. Just straw, boiling water, and the midwife who's seen everything. She lights a tallow candle. Says a quick prayer. Tells your husband to get out, which he does, gladly. Then it begins. The baby is born blue-lipped and slick with cold. The fire roars. You scream. The room smells of blood, smoke, and lye soap. You don't get rest. You wrap the newborn in linen, pray at nurses, and get up the next day to feed pigs. But you're alive. And so is this tiny, blinking human who just entered the world in the most impossible season. That's not just survival. That's a miracle. Now let's talk about something very real. Cabin fever. You've been snowed in for weeks. You've heard the same jokes 46 times. You know who snores, who lies, who cheats at dice. And it starts to eat at you. The boredom. The smells. The constant breathing of other people in your space. It's not glamorous. It's not fun. It's psychological warfare, with soup. What did peasants do when they were sick of each other? Games, dice, riddles, storytelling tournaments. Yes, those existed. Think medieval rap battles. Songs, some hilarious, some dirty, some haunting. You'd sing the same ones over and over until they became prayer. Mock trials. One village held fake court cases where someone got sentenced to fetch more firewood. Genius. Carving, little spoons, wooden toys, or ominous stick figures no one talked about. They found ways to laugh. To escape. To pretend, for 5 minutes, that they were somewhere else. Because you have to. If you don't, you start talking to the goat. And worse. It starts talking back. You step outside just after dawn. And something's different. You hear it. Not birds. Not people. Drip. Tiny at first. Then more. Then louder. Snow is melting off the thatch. The icicles on the well are weeping into the earth. The path to the woods is mud instead of stone. You take a deep breath. And for the first time in months, it doesn't hurt to inhale. The air smells, faintly, of wet bark and something living under the ground. You survived. Not just the cold. The fear. The hunger. The boredom. The heartbreak. You made it through a season that takes something from everyone. And somehow, you still have enough left to give. You look up. There's still snow on the hills. But the sky. It's blue. Warmer. And in your gut, you know. The worst is over. That medieval people were tougher than us? Maybe. That we're soft? Possibly. That goat soup is underrated? Definitely. But here's the real takeaway. Even in a time of brutal cold, hunger, sickness, and fear, people found ways to stay human. To sing. To love. To joke. To help one another through the dark. And you're still wired for that. Whether you're stuck in traffic, heartbroken, or buried in deadlines, you have the same instincts. The same fire. So don't let winter, of the season or the soul, convince you it's forever. Now imagine this. No matches. No lighters. No modern dry wood, newspaper, or kindling that doesn't smell like goat pee. You're a medieval peasant in December. Your only fire is sacred. And I don't mean that poetically. I mean literally. If it dies, you're screwed. So you keep it alive 24/7. Banked under ash. Protected like it's your baby, except this baby is cranky, needy, and hates wind. And if it does go out, you don't just light another one. You put on 6 layers of wool, trek through the snow to your neighbor's house, beg them for a burning stick, and pray it doesn't go out on the walk back. Yes, you've just become a character in an ancient survival horror game, Dark Souls, Hearth Edition. That fire is your stove, your heater, your light, your safety. You don't waste it. You tend it. You depend on it. And you learn the quiet art of coaxing a flame from embers like your life depends on it. Because it literally, actually, truly does. Let's talk about night. Not city night. Not twinkle lights and Netflix night. We're talking real, medieval, total blackout, can't see your own feet night. The kind of dark that makes you forget what faces look like. The kind of quiet where you start hearing your own heartbeat. The kind of stillness where a twig cracking sounds like a war horn. You don't go out after dusk unless you have to. Not because you're lazy, because it's dangerous. You trip on frozen roots. Fall into streams. Get lost 2 fields from your door. You hear wolves. You see lights in the distance. But are they lanterns? Or something else? Even inside, with a candle or fire going, the shadows stretch long. Corners of the room vanish. Your imagination fills in the blanks, usually wrong. And sleep? Sleep is not peaceful. You sleep light, always alert for the baby crying, the cow mooing, the chimney coughing. You don't rest so much as pause, because the dark doesn't forgive the careless. It devours them. Let's say you make it through most of January. Then something strange starts happening. You wake up, confused. You forget what day it is. You swear you hear voices behind the walls. You're not sick. Not exactly. You're just cold, all the time. Tired in your bones. Your body is alive, but your mind is turning on itself. Modern science calls this seasonal affective disorder. Back then, they just called it winter madness. Some believed it was punishment. Others thought it was the devil creeping in during long nights. Some peasants reported strange dreams. A woman in Wales swore she dreamed her family was turning into wolves, and refused to speak to them for a week. People hallucinated. Saw dead loved ones in the firelight. Heard laughter where there was none. Because you can keep the body warm enough to function. But the mind? The mind is much harder to keep lit. So how did they fight back? Simple. With whatever they had. Candle faith. Scroll ritual. Fire storytelling. You gather with others in the single warm room. You light a candle. You begin to speak. You tell stories about saints who turned away frost with just a prayer. You chant psalms, even if you can't read Latin, the rhythm keeps your fear at bay. You celebrate Candlemas in February, blessing wax lights and praying for longer days. And if none of that works, you invent something. A tale about forest spirits that guide lost children. A joke about death being afraid of your mother-in-law. A dirty ballad that makes everyone laugh, even the sad ones. Because stories are heat. Ritual is structure. And belief, in something, anything, is a kind of resistance. You fight the darkness however you can. Even if that means making it up as you go. Let's fast forward again. You're here. Right now. Watching this. Maybe you're warm. Maybe you're alone. Maybe you're exhausted by a world full of noise. But those peasants, they knew something. They knew how to slow down. How to share space without words. How to survive the long stretch of nothing without losing themselves. You and I, we panic in silence. They practiced it. You run from darkness. They lived inside it. And the most incredible part? They came out stronger. Not because they were special, but because they didn't have a choice. And somehow, that made them find a strength we've mostly forgotten. Maybe you're not freezing in a cottage with frost on the rafters. But maybe, somewhere inside, you felt your own winter. And maybe, just maybe, you're surviving it, too. One more thing before we end. You remember that tiny ember in the hearth? The one they guarded all night? That's you. Even if your world feels cold, or dim, or endless. You're the ember. The spark. You're worth keeping alive. Even when you're flickering. Even when you think you're out. Because one ember can start a fire. And one fire can carry a village through a winter. You might be wondering, what about the children? Well, medieval childhood wasn't exactly a snowball fight and cocoa. It was. Congratulations. You're 7. Here's a pitchfork. But even in brutal winters, kids found ways to be, well, kids. They made toys from bones and bits of fabric. They slid on frozen mud paths. They carved crude little animals from firewood scraps, and sometimes, those were the only toys they ever had. But make no mistake, winter didn't treat them gently. They caught colds. They starved first. They were bundled up in itchy wool until they looked like anxious potatoes, and still, it often wasn't enough. If your neighbor's child didn't show up one morning, no one had to ask why. Even you, the adult watching this now, would have had a shorter childhood. And maybe a shorter life. But somehow, the laughter still echoed between those freezing walls. Because even when your hands are cracked and your feet are numb, the sound of a child's giggle? That's a kind of warmth too. Okay. Let's get real dark for a second. Because winter wasn't just cold. It was hungry. We're not talking I skipped lunch hungry. We're talking, the rats disappeared and we don't know if that's a good thing or not. Crop failures weren't rare. Neither were famine years, like 1315 to 1317, when it rained for months and Europe basically became a mud pit of misery. By midwinter, grain stores ran low. Bread got thinner. Then moldy. Then green. Then, well, let's say creative substitutions began. Tree bark. Milled acorns. Ground up animal bones. Even dried manure, if you were really desperate. And if you're thinking, that sounds toxic. You're absolutely right. Some families made bread from ergot-contaminated rye, a hallucinogenic mold. Imagine starving and tripping at the same time. Not ideal. Then there's the hard choice. When there's one loaf and 4 mouths, how do you divide it? The answer depended on hope. If the baby looked weak, they got less. If the father could work, he got more. It wasn't cruelty. It was math. Cold, merciless math. Let's switch gears. You're freezing. The wind is laughing at your existence. What do you do? Layers. Layers like your life depends on it, because it does. Let's build your outfit. First, a linen shirt. Stiff as parchment. Smells like sour ale. You've worn it every day since St. Martin's feast. Over that, a wool tunic. Thick. Scratchy. Warm, if it's dry, which it isn't. Next, undyed hose, basically medieval leggings. Stuffed with straw, if you're smart. Then come the hand-me-downs. Your uncle's patched-up hood. Your brother's felted mittens. Your grandmother's squirrel-lined vest, don't ask. Your shoes? Wooden soles, leather tops, possibly 2 left feet if that's all you've got. No zippers. No Gore-Tex. No fleece. Just you, your ingenuity, and the scent of a dozen other humans. You invent insulation with rags and scraps and brute force. The trick. Trap the body heat before the cold gets ideas. We romanticize community a lot these days. You slept in groups. You shared beds, benches, body heat. If someone had a fever, yeah, that was risky, but the alternative was hypothermia. One fire, many bodies. That was the deal. And when someone's roof caved in under snow, you took them in. Not because you were noble, because if you were next, you'd need the same. It was social heating. A medieval survival version of, hey, scoot over or we both freeze. Neighbors rotated who had the warmest oven. They traded food, shared tasks, watched each other's children while someone nursed a cough. And they talked. Not like your post talked. Community wasn't optional. It was the only way you made it to March. And now we're here. Warm homes. Electric lights. Thermostats. Apps that tell us if it's sweater weather. But we're colder in other ways. We don't gather close unless there's a holiday. We don't share our last slice of bread. Heck, we DoorDash 2 more. We've traded proximity for privacy. Sharing for streaming. Togetherness for 10-second clips we watch alone. But ask yourself, would you rather be warm in an empty apartment? Or cold in a room full of people who care if you wake up? The peasants didn't survive winter because they were stronger. They survived because they belonged to each other. They didn't do it alone. And maybe, neither should we. So, you made it. Not just through this story, but through your winters. The silent ones. The hungry ones. The ones that felt endless. The medieval peasant. They didn't conquer the cold. They just endured it. One spoonful at a time. One fire tending at a time. One shared story at a time. And you're doing the same. Whether your winter is literal or not, keep your fire alive. However you can. The fire's fading. It's quiet. Too quiet. What now? You sing. Not like TikTok dance challenge sing, more like grandma's voice in the dark, carrying 200 years of memory kind of sing. Your breath makes fog. Your voice makes warmth. When to plant, what to fear, who died and who didn't. Some tunes were upbeat. Some were lullabies for children who might not see spring. Some were chants, slow, haunting, looping like the wind through the cracks. You didn't need a perfect pitch. You needed a reason to keep your mouth moving. Because if the wolves were howling outside, you howled back, in harmony. We don't like talking about this part. But you should know, not everyone made it. And when someone died in winter, it wasn't just heartbreaking, it was logistically awful. You can't dig a grave through frozen ground. You can't keep a body in the one-room hut with toddlers. So you get creative. Sometimes the body was wrapped in linen, stored in the barn, or placed atop snow-covered stones outside the church until spring softened the soil. Imagine that, visiting your neighbor's loved one every day, just lying in the snow, wrapped like a ghost. The burial would come later, with singing, a procession, prayers you could barely hear over the thawing earth. And that grave? It reminded everyone. Make it to March. Please, make it to March. You finally drift off, not in a soft bed, but on a rough straw mattress that smells like damp wool and burnt soup. But in sleep, you fly. Your dreams are wild and mythic and sacred. Saints speak to you. Your dead mother walks in, sets down bread on the hearth, and leaves without a word. You see green fields that don't yet exist. In medieval belief, dreams weren't meaningless. They were messages, warnings, visions, visitations. Did you see a black dog at the gate? Bad omen. Did you dream of fire that didn't burn? A miracle coming. Night wasn't rest, it was another realm, just as real. And when you wake, you tell someone. You remember. You add it to the growing pile of human hope, one whispered prophecy at a time. Then, one morning, something's different. You hear it before you feel it. Drip, drip, drip. The snow on the roof is melting. Slowly, but unmistakably. You smell mud, glorious, rich, wet dirt. The air tastes different. The sun doesn't just shine, it leans in. You step outside in your worst pair of shoes and find something miraculous, a sprig of green. Just one. But it's enough. The village starts to stir. Someone finds a dandelion and puts it on the altar. Someone else says they saw a bird. You don't know if it's true, you believe it anyway. And now, it's ritual time. The peasants didn't just say, "Yay, spring." They celebrated survival. They danced, sang, blessed tools, waved smoke over seeds. They reenacted battles between winter and spring, full-on costume dramas with symbolic mud fights. Because you don't just walk out of a dark tunnel. You crawl out, screaming, laughing, crying, and covered in frostbite. And you mark it. So the next time you're in the dark, you remember. You made it before. You'll make it again. Okay. You've seen it all now. The hunger. The cold. The desperation. The death. The small, stubborn joys. And here's the truth. Surviving a medieval winter wasn't a triumph of strength. It was a triumph of meaning. They didn't just endure. They made every miserable moment sacred. With songs. With rituals. With love. With each other. And maybe that's what we've lost, not the firewood or the sheep pelts, but the purpose. We panic if the Wi-Fi's out for 10 minutes. But a peasant? They could sit in the quiet and feel things. They could sit with loss, or hope, or silence, and know it wasn't empty. It was full. So here's the thought I'll leave you with. Fire, what would it mean to survive your own winter with that kind of sacred stubbornness? To light a candle not for light, but for memory. To tell stories not to impress, but to stay human. To endure, not alone, but surrounded by song, story, and the shared breath of a cold world that you chose not to give up on. Hey, if you made it this far, you traveled. You heard the wind outside that crooked cottage. You stirred the stew. You held the candle. You fed the fire. And maybe, just maybe, you saw a little of yourself in that peasant by the hearth. So, now it's your turn. Share your favorite part in the comments. What surprised you? What haunted you? Speech balloon tag someone who needs to hear this. Alright, you're shivering, coughing, and probably covered in some mystery dirt. What now? Medicine. Medieval peasants didn't have your fancy pharmacy apps or flu shots. Nope. They had herbs, superstition, and a whole lot of guesswork. You wake up with a pounding headache and a chest full of cough. You're not just sick, you're a walking, coughing rumor of doom. Your medicine cabinet might look like this. A pinch of dried nettle to cleanse the blood, which probably just tasted like grass. A poultice of onions and honey slapped on your chest, sticky, smelly, but maybe it helped. Boiled yarrow tea, said to stop bleeding and infections, basically the duct tape of medieval healing. If herbs failed, you prayed. A lot. Maybe to Saint Sebastian for protection against plague. Or to the village's patron saint, hoping for a miracle. You might wear an amulet, carry a charm, or recite a prayer over your bed before you tried to sleep. But sometimes it was just tough luck. Cold weakened your immune system, and diseases spread like wildfire in crowded huts. The best cure was surviving. You know what's the worst winter enemy besides cold? Dirty water. Medieval villages didn't have plumbing. No running water. No warm showers. You fetched water from the well or a stream, often frozen or crusted with ice. Now imagine this. You scoop a bucket of water, it's half frozen, smells like mud and old leaves. You try to wash your face and hands. Your fingers go numb before the dirt comes off. Bathing? Rare. A full bath? Maybe once a year, if the river wasn't frozen and you had the time. So you pile on layers of grime and sweat and smoke residue. The smell? Well, think of a campfire, some goats, and an old sock. That's your perfume. But here's the kicker, that smell was part of survival. It helped keep parasites away. It told others in the village who was sick or strong. It was part of the social fabric. You might cringe now, but medieval peasants accepted their stink as part of the human condition. Now, let's talk about the invisible shield, superstition and faith. They believed the cold wasn't just physical. It was spiritual. Winter was the devil's playground, full of dark spirits, curses, and wandering souls. So they lit candles, hung herbs over doorways, and left offerings for the spirits of the hearth. Ever heard of the hearth maiden? She was the spirit who protected the fire. If you kept the hearth fire burning bright, she'd keep the house safe. But if the fire died? Oh, boy. Bad news. You'd sleep with iron scissors under your pillow to ward off nightmares. You'd avoid whistling inside the house, because that's supposedly called evil spirits. Every creak and groan of the cabin was another ghost story waiting to happen. Faith was their hope. Superstition was their armor. You're freezing, starving, and surrounded by beasts. Not wolves, your animals. Sheep, pigs, chickens, maybe a scrappy dog or two. They weren't pets. They were your livelihood and, surprisingly, your source of warmth. Peasants often shared their hut's small space with animals during the worst cold spells. Imagine a few woolly sheep huddled in the corner, their breathing warm, their bodies radiating heat. You press close to the animals at night, sharing warmth in the only way possible. Of course, that meant dealing with the smell, the fleas, and the occasional surprise on the floor. But when your feet are numb and frostbite whispers, those little beasts were like furry heaters with hooves. Plus, livestock meant food and milk, which kept you alive, so they were precious beyond measure. Look, we could spend hours talking about cold, hunger, superstition, and death, and still only scratch the surface. What really kept medieval peasants alive was their sheer, stubborn resilience. You can't build a fire without sticks. You can't survive a winter without hope. And hope, for these people, was a living thing. It was woven into songs. It was whispered in prayers. It was hammered into plows and carved into crosses. When the wind blew hard enough to crack bones, they didn't just curl up and give in. They faced it, with grit, with cunning, with each other. And so do you. So here's my question for you, sitting in your comfy chair, maybe with a blanket and a hot drink. If medieval peasants could survive winters with barely any heat, limited food, dirty water, superstition, and a dozen other challenges, what's your excuse? We've got central heating, medical care, and endless distractions, yet sometimes we complain louder. Maybe we can learn something from them. To find warmth not just in things, but in people. To find hope not just in comfort, but in community. To fight not just for survival, but for meaning. Before we wrap up, let me know in the comments. What part of medieval winter survival surprised you most? How do you find warmth on a cold night? Have you ever experienced a modern winter that felt as brutal as the old days? And hey, if you enjoyed this deep dive, hit that like button and share with someone who loves history, or just hates being cold. If you want more stories from the past, drop a suggestion below. And as always, stay warm, stay curious, and keep your fire burning. No gentle alarm. No coffee brewing. Just the biting cold sneaking through cracks in the wooden walls. Your breath hovers like tiny clouds, freezing mid-air. Your fingers are stiff. Your feet might be numb. The fire, either barely glowing, or completely dead. So you scramble, because if you don't get that fire back, you'll freeze faster than you can say medieval misery. You shuffle over to the hearth, grab the last bits of charred wood or peat, and coax the embers back to life. Outside, the village is silent, save for the crunch of snow beneath frozen boots. In your tiny hut, your family stirs, the children rubbing sleep from their eyes, the elders pulling their threadbare cloaks tighter. No one speaks much, not because they're rude, but because every breath feels like a gasp in a freezer. Breakfast? Imagine a bowl of watery gruel, maybe barley or oats, cooked down to something barely resembling food. If you're lucky, it's sweetened with a bit of honey or flavored with wild herbs. If you're unlucky, it's cold, thin, and smells faintly of last week's meal. Meat? Rare as a blue moon. Winter means stored food, dried, salted, smoked. Maybe a few turnips or carrots pulled from the root cellar, tough and bitter. Every bite is a reminder, this is what survival tastes like. It's not gourmet, it's necessary. And still, you eat. They're the wild cards of the village. They run in the snow, laugh despite the cold, and find joy in the smallest things, a frozen puddle to skate on, a stray cat to chase. But they also get sick the easiest. Their tiny hands freeze. Their little bellies go hungry. Still, they help. They fetch water, tend animals, chop kindling. Sometimes they wake in the night crying from cold, or worse, from dreams full of shadows and fear. Parents soothe them with whispered stories, not fairy tales, but tales of strength and survival. Because the future depends on them. Now, meet the elders. They're the village's living memory, the keepers of wisdom and hard truths. Their bones ache in the cold. Their eyes have seen too many winters. But their knowledge? Priceless. They teach the young ones how to mend clothes with scraps. They remember which herbs help, and which stories to tell by firelight. They remind everyone, winter ends, and so will this. Their presence is a lifeline, a reminder that survival is a cycle, not a sentence. Imagine now, the village as a whole. Every hut, every person, every animal, a thread in the survival fabric. You share what little you have, a bit of bread, a warm cloak, a story. You trade skills, the blacksmith sharpens the plow, the healer tends wounds, the farmer teaches seed saving. You gather for moments of ritual, around the church on feast days, or at the communal well, even in the bitter cold. Sometimes you fight, sure. Humans do that. But mostly, you cling to each other. Because alone, you wouldn't last a week. Together, you might make it through the longest, darkest night. Long winters drag down spirits. The days are short, the sun weak. You're stuck indoors with limited light and limited hope. People get anxious, depressed, scared. You worry about the food running out. You grieve lost loved ones. You wonder if spring will ever come. But peasants found ways to cope. Singing, storytelling, drinking mead, sometimes. They leaned into faith, finding comfort in prayer and ritual. They leaned on each other, sharing burdens and warmth. And sometimes, they laughed, because humor is a rebellion against despair. So what does this mean for us, living with heaters and supermarkets and endless distractions? Maybe this. We take warmth for granted. We get impatient when the Wi-Fi lags. We panic if the heat drops below 70 degrees. But medieval peasants? They survived with nothing but fire, faith, and each other. What if, just for a moment, we could feel that raw connection? To the earth, to community, to the deep rhythms of survival? It's not about romanticizing hardship. It's about remembering our resilience, the ancient spark that kept humans alive through the worst. What's your version of a medieval winter? What's the toughest challenge you've had to survive? How do you find warmth, literally and figuratively, when the world feels cold? Drop your stories in the comments. And if you learn something new about how people survive the coldest nights without electricity or pizza delivery, hit that like button. Because this is history with heartbeat. The warmth you feel isn't just from your heater or blanket. It's from centuries of human grit, of people who refused to give up when the world turned white and wild. You don't have synthetic fibers or down jackets. Your coat? Probably coarse wool, patched and threadbare. Your boots? Thick leather, cracked from ice and mud. But wool? Oh yes. Wool was king. It's warm, water-resistant-ish, and could be layered to trap heat. Underneath, linen shirts, scratchy and cold, but better than bare skin. You patch holes with scraps of old cloth, hand sewing by the flicker of candlelight. Gloves? Maybe made from sheep skin, but often just rough cloth wrapped around fingers. You'd also fashion simple tools for winter. A wooden shovel to clear snow. A hooked staff to haul frozen logs. A metal scraper to chip ice from water barrels. And don't forget the all-important fire-making kit, flintstones, tinder, dried moss or fungus, and a small knife. Without these, well, your chances of surviving a winter night dropped sharply. The hearth was everything. Not just a place to cook or warm yourself, but the emotional and spiritual core of the home. Fire wasn't just heat, it was life itself. You spent hours tending the hearth, adding logs, coaxing flames, managing smoke. Smoke was a constant companion. It seeped into clothes, eyes, and hair. The roof of your hut was probably blackened from years of smoke stains. But that smoke also kept insects and pests at bay. At night, the fire was a comfort and a danger. Peasants slept near it, sometimes just feet away, risking burns and soot inhalation. But the warmth was worth the risk. The fire's glow chased away the darkness and the fear that came with it. Families gathered around it, telling stories, repairing clothes, or praying. In many ways, the fire was the village's true beacon during the coldest months. Nope. The cold slowed crops but didn't stop life. Some work was harder. Frozen earth made digging and planting impossible. But there was plenty to do. Caring for livestock, who needed feeding and shelter. Mending tools and clothes to avoid losing precious resources. Preparing fireside crafts like weaving baskets or carving wooden utensils. Gathering and chopping firewood, sometimes from frozen forests miles away. Imagine dragging heavy logs through knee-deep snow. Your fingers raw, your breath freezing mid-day. You might work all day with no lunch beyond a bite of cold bread. And yet, this labor was essential. Without it, come spring, famine awaited. Villages marked the winter with festivals and rituals, brief bursts of joy. Think of the feast of St. Nicholas or Yule celebrations. People danced, sang, and feasted, even if the feast was modest by today's standards. They lit candles and bonfires to chase away evil spirits and welcome the returning sun. Songs and stories weren't just entertainment. They were survival tools, passing knowledge, bonding communities, and keeping hope alive. Children played simple games with makeshift toys. Adults told tales of heroes, ghosts, and the changing seasons. Sometimes, they drank mead or ale, the medieval comfort food for the soul. These moments reminded everyone, yes, winter is harsh, but it will end. Snow might trap families inside for days or weeks. Communication between villages slowed. Isolation bred fear and superstition. But at the same time, it forged bonds. Neighbors shared food, firewood, and stories. Villages came together to solve problems, like broken wells or lost livestock. Even in isolation, humans sought connection. People prayed together, met in the church, and celebrated feasts as a collective. The social fabric, fragile in summer, became crucial in winter. You might feel alone, but you were never truly by yourself. Long, dark winters can crack even the strongest spirit. Fear, sadness, and doubt crept like frostbite into minds. Peasants coped by focusing on small goals, getting through one day at a time, finding beauty in a shared meal or a child's laughter, leaning on faith and ritual. They cultivated hope like a secret weapon, because sometimes, warmth was as much about mindset as fire. We have thermostats, electric blankets, grocery stores open 24/7. Still, winter can feel isolating and harsh. What if we borrowed a page from medieval peasants? Bundle up with layers, sure, but also lean on community. Cherish small rituals, a candlelit dinner, a family storytime. Remember, resilience isn't just about muscle, it's about heart. Maybe we can survive our own winters better by embracing that old-school grit. What's your winter survival kit? Do you have rituals or tools that get you through the cold? What stories or songs keep you warm inside? And if you want more deep dives into the gritty, fascinating lives of our ancestors, tell me what era or topic to